One chilly morning, a small, determined puppy wandered into a bustling town square, barking at passers-by and tugging at pant legs. But it wasn't looking for food or a home. Its mission was far greater. When a kind-hearted young man finally followed the puppy, he stumbled upon a heartbreaking scene that would change his life forever. What could have driven such bravery in this tiny creature? The morning was crisp, with a light mist curling around the cobblestone streets of Silverwood, a quaint town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. The locals were just beginning their day, shopkeepers arranging their displays, children rushing off to school, and farmers unloading produce at the bustling market square. Amid the lively activity, a small golden-furred puppy darted through the crowd, its paws barely making a sound on the cobblestones. Its coat was matted with dirt, and its dark eyes darted frantically, scanning the unfamiliar faces of the townsfolk. Despite its disheveled appearance, the puppy had an air of determination. It barked sharply at anyone who came near, as though it were trying to speak. Most people ignored it, brushing it off as another stray, but the puppy didn't give up. A young man named Adrian, a university student home on break, was standing near a cafe, sipping his coffee and enjoying the morning sun. He noticed the puppy weaving through the crowd and barking insistently. Its small frame trembled, not from the cold, but from urgency. Intrigued, Adrian crouched down and called to it, "Hey there, little one, are you lost?" The puppy immediately locked eyes with him and barked again, louder this time, before tugging at his pant leg. Adrian laughed softly, assuming the dog was hungry. He tore off a piece of his croissant and held it out, but the puppy ignored it entirely. Instead, it barked again and tugged harder, glancing back toward the edge of the square as if urging him to follow. Adrian's curiosity piqued. "What's up, buddy? You want me to go with you?" he asked, standing up and letting the puppy lead him. It darted ahead, pausing every few steps to ensure he was following. The crowd seemed to fade away as Adrian left the square, his coffee abandoned on a bench. The puppy led him down a narrow, winding path that veered toward the woods. Adrian hesitated for a moment, the cheerful noises of the town now replaced by the rustle of leaves and distant birdsong. But the puppy's urgency was contagious, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something important awaited him at the end of this strange journey. Adrian followed the puppy deeper into the woods, the cheerful bustle of the town fading behind him. The narrow path was overgrown, with roots snaking across the ground and leaves crunching underfoot. The puppy kept glancing back, its tail wagging slightly, as if to ensure he was still following. Each bark seemed to urge him on, though the air grew cooler and the trees more imposing with every step. The young man couldn't help but wonder what had driven the tiny dog to approach him. "What are you trying to show me, huh?" he murmured, stepping over a fallen branch. Despite his curiosity, a sense of unease began to creep in. The deeper they went, the less familiar the forest felt. Adrian had grown up in Silverwood and knew its outskirts well. But this trail was new to him, hidden, forgotten, or perhaps simply unnoticed all these years. The puppy finally stopped at a clearing, panting heavily but refusing to sit. It barked again, its small body trembling as it stared intently at a patch of underbrush. Adrian stepped closer, brushing aside the branches and brambles. What he saw made him gasp. Lying on the ground was a larger dog, its golden fur streaked with mud and its body partially hidden by leaves. It was clear she had been there for some time. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes half closed, and her left hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. Around her paw, Adrian noticed the painful tangles of barbed vines and thorns cutting into her skin. Despite her condition, she lifted her head weakly at the sight of Adrian and her puppy. "Oh no," Adrian whispered, his heart sinking. He knelt beside the injured dog, careful not to startle her. The puppy whined and nuzzled against its mother, clearly distressed. "Hey there, girl," Adrian said softly. "It's okay. I'm going to help you." Adrian quickly assessed the situation. The dog was dehydrated and weak, her injuries likely from a desperate attempt to free herself from the thorny vines. The tangled vegetation was dense, and Adrian realized it would take considerable effort to remove it without causing further pain. He cursed under his breath, wishing he'd brought his phone. He needed help. He looked at the puppy, who was now licking its mother's face, trying to comfort her. "You did well, little one," he said, gently scratching the pup behind the ears. "But I can't do this alone." Without hesitation, Adrian stood and scanned the area. In the distance, he spotted a wooden structure, a small, dilapidated shed he hadn't noticed before. Perhaps there were tools inside that could help. He told the puppy, "Stay here and keep her company. I'll be right back." The shed, though weathered and overrun with moss, was sturdier than it appeared. Inside, Adrian found an assortment of old gardening tools and supplies. A pair of rusted shears caught his eye, along with a coil of rope. They weren't ideal, but they'd have to do. He also spotted a dusty bottle of water on a shelf. It was sealed, and though the label was faded, it looked clean enough to use. Hurrying back to the clearing, Adrian set to work. He used the shears to carefully cut away the thorny vines, his hands steady despite the difficulty of the task. The injured dog flinched occasionally, letting out soft whimpers, but Adrian spoke to her in a calming voice, reassuring her with every snip of the shears. "It's okay, girl. You're going to be all right. Just hang in there." Once the vines were removed, Adrian gently washed the dog's wounds with the water, using his jacket sleeve to pat them dry. The puppy watched intently, as if understanding the importance of every action. When Adrian finished, he fashioned a makeshift splint for her leg using a sturdy stick and the rope he'd found. The dog's breathing began to even out, her eyes showing a flicker of gratitude. Adrian smiled, relieved that his efforts seemed to be making a difference. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" he said, stroking her head. "Now we just need to get you somewhere safe." Lifting the dog carefully, Adrian was struck by how light she was. Malnutrition had taken its toll, and her once strong frame was now frail. The puppy walked beside him, its tail wagging slightly as they began the trek back toward the town. Adrian knew it wouldn't be easy. Carrying the injured dog through the uneven forest terrain was a challenge, and his arms ached after only a few minutes. But he pressed on, driven by the thought of getting her the care she needed. Adrian trudged through the forest, each step deliberate as he carried the injured dog in his arms. Her weight was modest, but the strain of navigating uneven ground while ensuring her safety was starting to take its toll. The puppy trotted faithfully at his side, occasionally darting ahead before circling back as if to encourage Adrian to keep moving. As they neared the edge of the forest, the sounds of the town began to filter through the trees. Distant voices, the hum of cars, and the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog. Adrian let out a breath of relief. They were close. The veterinary clinic, located just off the town square, would be their destination. The dog stirred slightly in his arms, her eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. Adrian whispered, "Hang in there, girl. We're almost there." The puppy barked softly, as if echoing his reassurance. When they finally emerged from the woods, Adrian's appearance drew immediate attention. A few passers-by stopped in their tracks, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. One elderly woman approached, clutching her purse. "Young man, is that dog all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She's hurt," Adrian replied, shifting the dog in his arms. "I found her trapped in the woods. I'm taking her to the vet." The woman nodded, her eyes softening. "Bless you, poor thing looks like she's been through a lot." She glanced down at the puppy, who wagged its tail at her. "You're doing a good thing, dear." Adrian offered a quick smile of thanks and continued on his way, his focus unwavering. The streets of Silverwood were familiar, but the journey to the clinic felt longer than usual. His arms ached, and beads of sweat trickled down his brow. Still, he refused to slow down. The bell above the clinic door jingled as Adrian pushed it open with his shoulder. The reception area was bright and clean, the air tinged with the faint smell of antiseptic. A young woman in scrubs looked up from the desk, her eyes widening at the sight before her. "Is she hurt?" the receptionist asked, standing quickly. "Yes," Adrian said, his voice urgent. "She's injured and weak. And this little one led me to her." He nodded toward the puppy, who stood at his feet wagging its tail nervously. The receptionist called into the back, and within moments, a veterinarian appeared. Dr. Evelyn Harper, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and an air of calm authority, approached. "Let's get her to an exam room," she said, motioning for Adrian to follow. In the room, Adrian gently laid the dog on the exam table. "Doctor, Harper began her assessment immediately, her hands moving deftly as she checked for additional injuries. "You did a good job stabilizing her leg," she noted, glancing at Adrian. "Where did you find her?" Adrian explained the situation, recounting how the puppy had led him to the injured dog in the forest. Dr. Harper listened intently, her expression grave. "It's a good thing you brought her in. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Her injuries are manageable, but she's going to need time and care to recover." The puppy whined softly, standing on its hind legs to peer over the edge of the table. Adrian smiled despite the tension in the room. "Looks like someone's worried about their mum, Doctor." Harper chuckled. "A loyal little one, isn't he? They'll both be all right with the right care." She turned to the receptionist. "Get an IV started for fluids and prep the X-ray machine. I want to confirm there's no internal damage." As the clinic staff moved efficiently, Adrian stepped back, giving them space to work. He watched as the dog was carefully hooked up to the IV, her breathing becoming steadier. The puppy, unwilling to be separated, lay down near the table, its watchful eyes never leaving its mother. Dr. Harper approached Adrian again. "You've done more than most people would have in your situation," she said. "It's not every day someone carries an injured dog through the woods to get help." Adrian shrugged and feeling a bit self-conscious. "I couldn't just leave her there. And the little guy." He gestured to the puppy. "He wouldn't have let me." Dr. Harper smiled warmly. "Well, you've saved 2 lives today. That's something to be proud of." As the staff at the clinic tended to the injured dog, Adrian leaned against the wall, observing the scene unfold. The puppy, still vigilant, stayed close to its mother's side. "Doctor." Harper worked meticulously, her focus unwavering as she examined the X-rays displayed on a nearby monitor. Adrian's thoughts wandered, reflecting on the strange circumstances that had brought him here. The forest, the unexpected discovery, and the determined puppy. It all felt surreal. His musings were interrupted when Dr. Harper approached him, her expression serious, yet tinged with curiosity. "Adrian, wow," she began, holding a clipboard. "There's something unusual about this case." He straightened, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Dr. Harper gestured to the X-rays. "While her injuries are consistent with being trapped, I also found signs of previous trauma. Her body shows evidence of old fractures, ones that have healed improperly." Adrian's stomach sank. "You mean she's been hurt before?" Dr. Harper nodded. "Yes, and not by accident. These injuries suggest she may have been mistreated or involved in something dangerous. Additionally," she hesitated, flipping through the pages on her clipboard. "I scanned for a microchip, and she has one. It's registered to a name, but the address is out of state." Adrian's curiosity piqued. Who does she belong to? Dr. Harper handed him a sheet of paper. The name Eleanor Fisher was printed at the top, followed by an address in a neighboring state. "The name matches a woman who reported her dog missing 2 months ago. I'll contact her to confirm, but this might explain how the dog ended up here." Adrian's mind raced. If the dog was from out of state, how had she made it to Silverwood? And what about the puppy? Was it hers, or had it simply found her in the forest and taken her under its wing? The questions weighed heavily as Dr. Harper stepped away to make the call. Adrian glanced at the puppy, who was now sitting beside him, its wide eyes looking up as if sensing his unease. Minutes later, Dr. Harper returned, her expression unreadable. "I reached Eleanor Fisher. She confirmed the dog's description and the microchip number. Her name is Daisy. Eleanor's been searching for her ever since she went missing during a camping trip near a river, about 100 miles from here." Adrian felt a pang of relief at the prospect of Daisy being reunited with her owner, but Dr. Harper's expression told him there was more to the story. "What else did she say?" he asked. "She mentioned that Daisy was her late husband's dog, a military veteran who passed away last year. Daisy was his companion, and they had a bond unlike anything she's seen before. Losing Daisy has been a devastating blow for her." Adrian nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Does she know about the puppy?" Dr. Harper's gaze softened. "That's the part she couldn't explain. She had no idea Daisy might have had puppies or if this one is even hers. It adds another layer to this mystery." The revelation sent a ripple of emotion through Adrian. The idea that Daisy had endured so much, loss, injury, and separation, only to survive and potentially become a mother, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "What's next?" Adrian asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts. "We'll keep Daisy here to recover and arrange for Eleanor to come as soon as possible," Dr. Harper said. "As for the puppy, we'll need to test their connection to confirm if it's hers. Either way, he's not leaving her side anytime soon." Adrian looked down at the small dog, who yawned and curled up at his feet. "I don't think he's going anywhere." As Daisy settled into the clinic's care, Adrian began to feel a sense of temporary relief. Yet, the mystery surrounding her journey and the little puppy by her side nagged at him. How had a dog tied to a veteran's legacy ended up injured and alone in a forest? And what about the puppy? Was he a random stray, or did he hold a deeper connection to Daisy's story? The next morning, Adrian returned to the clinic to check on Daisy and the puppy. Dr. Harper greeted him with a tired smile. "She's stable, but there's something you should know," she began, motioning him toward the exam room. Inside, Daisy rested on a padded bed, her leg now in a proper splint. The puppy lay curled beside her, his small body rising and falling in rhythm with hers. Dr. Harper knelt down and ran her hand along Daisy's back. "While cleaning her wounds last night, I found a second tag hidden under her collar. It's engraved with a number and a symbol that looks like a military insignia." Adrian's eyes widened. "You think it's related to her previous owner?" Dr. Harper nodded. "Possibly. It could be a unit code or something similar. I've reached out to a local veterans organization to see if they can help identify it." Adrian crouched beside Daisy, gently stroking her head. "She's been through so much. If this leads to answers, it'll be worth it." As they spoke, the clinic doorbell jingled, and a staff member called out, "Dr. Harper, there's someone here asking about the dog." Adrian exchanged a glance with Dr. Harper, a mix of curiosity and caution passing between them. They walked to the front desk, where a man in his late 50s stood, his weathered face framed by a grey beard. He wore a faded jacket with patches sewn onto it, suggesting a history of military service. "Can I help you?" Dr. Harper asked, her tone polite but guarded. The man nodded. "I'm Daniel. I work with the local veterans group. You mentioned a dog with a military tag." Dr. Harper gestured toward the exam room. "Yes, we have her here. She was injured in the forest, but she's recovering. Do you recognize this?" She handed him a photo of the tag and insignia. Daniel studied it intently before his expression shifted. "This is from a canine unit that operated overseas about a decade ago. These dogs were trained for search and rescue missions as well as bomb detection." Adrian's curiosity deepened. "You're saying Daisy might have been a service dog?" Daniel nodded. "It's likely, and if that's the case, her training could explain how she survived the injuries and made it out of wherever she was. These dogs are remarkably resilient." Dr. Harper asked, "Do you know how we might confirm her history?" Daniel hesitated. "There's a database, but accessing it isn't easy. It's restricted to handlers and certain military personnel. I can reach out to a few contacts and see what I can find." Adrian couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for Daisy. If she truly was a former service dog, her story was even more extraordinary than he had imagined. While Daniel made calls and shared updates with Dr. Harper, Adrian returned to the exam room. The puppy perked up at his presence, bounding over with a wagging tail. Adrian crouched to pet him, feeling a growing connection to the little dog. "Hey, buddy," Adrian murmured. "You've been through a lot too, huh? You're a brave little guy." As Adrian spent time with Daisy and the puppy, an idea began to form in his mind. If Daisy's history could be uncovered, it might help explain how she ended up in the forest and bring closure to her owner, Eleanor. But it also raised another question. What if Daisy wasn't just a survivor, but also a hero with a story that needed to be shared? The following day, Adrian arrived at the clinic early, greeted by a calm, almost serene atmosphere. Daisy was resting, her injuries slowly healing, while the puppy lay sprawled beside her. Adrian noticed a shift in Daisy's demeanor. Her eyes, though tired, seemed more trusting. It was as if she sensed the safety and care surrounding her. Daniel entered shortly after, carrying a worn notebook and an old photograph. He looked at Adrian and Dr. Harper with a sense of urgency. "I've got some news," he began, setting the notebook on the counter. "I reached out to an old handler from the unit Daisy might belong to. He confirmed the tag matches a dog named Stella. If this is her, she was retired from active duty 5 years ago and adopted by Eleanor, her handler." Adrian's breath caught. "Stella? That's her real name?" Daniel nodded. "Handlers often rename retired dogs to help them adjust to civilian life, but their military records keep the original name. Eleanor spoke so highly of Stella, her loyalty, intelligence, and courage." Adrian felt a pang of guilt. "Eleanor? She passed away. I found her note explaining that she left Stella or Daisy to her nephew, but something went wrong." Daniel's face fell. "That's tragic. If the dog ended up in the forest, abandoned and injured, someone failed her, someone betrayed the trust Eleanor placed in them." Dr. Harper, ever practical, interjected. "The question is, what do we do now? Stella needs time to recover, but this puppy complicates things. If Stella was abandoned, how did the puppy become part of her story?" Adrian glanced at the playful puppy. His curiosity piqued. What if the puppy isn't random? Maybe he's part of why Stella ended up out there. A protector, a companion. There's more to this. Daniel leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "We need to find Eleanor's nephew. If he abandoned Stella, he should be held accountable. But if there's more to the story, we owe it to Stella to uncover the truth." Adrian felt torn. What if the nephew didn't mean to abandon her? What if he's unaware of what happened or tried to find her? Dr. Harper chimed in. "It's possible. But if someone truly cared for Stella, wouldn't they have reported her missing or contacted the authorities?" As the three debated the possibilities, the doorbell jingled and a woman entered the clinic, her face pale and anxious. She carried a flyer featuring Stella's photo and the words "Missing Dog Reward Offered." Adrian stepped forward. "Can I help you?" The woman introduced herself as Lydia. "I'm Eleanor's neighbor. After she passed, her nephew, Jared, moved in temporarily to settle her estate. I tried to help him adjust, but something felt off. One day he said Stella ran away. He looked devastated, but I couldn't shake the feeling there was more to the story." Adrian's heart raced. "Did he ever find her?" Lydia shook her head. "I don't think so. He left a few months ago, saying he couldn't bear to stay in Eleanor's house anymore. But I found this flyer recently and thought I'd try again." Daniel held up the photo. "This dog is Stella. She's here, recovering." Lydia's relief was palpable. "Thank God. I knew she deserved better. Please, tell me she's okay." Dr. Harper reassured her. "She's healing, but it'll take time. Do you know where Jared might be?" Lydia hesitated. "He mentioned going to a cabin Eleanor used to take him to when he was younger. It's isolated, deep in the woods. He might be there." Adrian felt a surge of determination. "Then we find him. If he has answers, Stella deserves to know the truth." Adrian, Daniel, and Lydia gathered in the clinic's small break room, poring over a map Lydia had brought. She traced her finger along a winding trail leading to the remote cabin Jared might be staying at. "This is where Eleanor used to take Jared when he was young," Lydia explained. "It's peaceful, surrounded by trees and a small creek. She used to say it was a sanctuary for both her and Stella after her retirement." Adrian studied the map. "If Jared is there, maybe he's been struggling with guilt or grief. Losing Eleanor and Stella might have been too much." Daniel, ever skeptical, folded his arms. "Or he's hiding. If he abandoned Stella and left her to fend for herself, he might not want to face the consequences," Lydia interjected, her voice trembling. "Jared adored Eleanor, and I want to believe he cared for Stella too. But I agree, if he's there, we need to find out what happened. Stella deserves that much." Dr. Harper entered the room, holding a clipboard. "Stella's strong enough for a short trip, but only if she's handled carefully. The pup should stay here. He's still too young for travel." Adrian looked toward the recovery room where Stella rested. She might recognize the place. If it was her sanctuary, it could help her heal emotionally too. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Taking Stella is risky. What if Jared reacts badly, or worse? What if he's not there?" Adrian's resolve hardened. "Then we'll know we tried. Stella didn't give up, and neither will I. The next morning, Adrian loaded Stella into his car, her movements still cautious but more confident. Lydia sat in the passenger seat, holding the map, while Daniel followed in his truck with supplies. The drive toward the cabin grew increasingly treacherous, the paved roads giving way to dirt paths riddled with potholes. As they neared the cabin, Adrian noticed Stella's ears perk up, her nose twitching. "She remembers this place," he said quietly, his heart swelling with hope. When the cabin came into view, it was both idyllic and eerie. The weathered wood structure stood against a backdrop of towering trees, its windows reflecting the morning sunlight. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, confirming someone was inside. Daniel parked his truck behind Adrian's car, stepping out cautiously. "This is it. Let's hope he's willing to talk." Adrian led Stella up the creaky porch steps, knocking firmly on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the door opened a crack, revealing a gaunt, disheveled man. His eyes darted between Adrian and Stella before widening in recognition. "Stella?" Jared's voice cracked, his hand gripping the doorframe for support. "Is that her?" "She's here," Adrian said firmly. "We need answers. What happened to her? Why did you leave her?" Jared's face contorted with guilt as he opened the door wider. "Come in, I'll explain." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, with a faint scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. Jared motioned for them to sit while he remained standing, pacing nervously. "I loved Stella," he began, his voice trembling. "When Eleanor passed, I thought I could handle taking care of her. But the grief, it was too much. Stella reminded me of everything I'd lost. I didn't abandon her on purpose. One day she got loose and I couldn't find her. I searched for weeks, but I failed." Adrian felt a surge of frustration. "Why didn't you report her missing? Why didn't you tell someone?" Jared looked down, shame etched across his face. "I didn't want to admit I'd failed, Eleanor. I thought if I couldn't find Stella, I didn't deserve to keep searching. I thought she'd find her way back, like she always did." Lydia spoke up, her voice steady but firm. "She didn't. She was injured and alone. If Adrian hadn't found her, she might not have survived." Jared sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I never stopped loving her." Stella, who had been lying quietly by Adrian's feet, suddenly stood and approached Jared. Her movements were tentative but purposeful. Jared's eyes filled with tears as Stella nudged his hand with her nose. "She remembers me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Even after everything. She remembers." Adrian felt a lump in his throat. "Dogs don't hold grudges, Jared. But they do deserve care and respect. If you're willing to take responsibility, there's a chance to make things right." The next morning, Adrian loaded Stella into his car, her movements still cautious but more confident. Lydia sat in the passenger seat, holding the map, while Daniel followed in his truck with supplies. The drive toward the cabin grew increasingly treacherous, the paved roads giving way to dirt paths riddled with potholes. As they neared the cabin, Adrian noticed Stella's ears perk up, her nose twitching. "She remembers this place," he said quietly, his heart swelling with hope. When the cabin came into view, it was both idyllic and eerie. The weathered wood structure stood against a backdrop of towering trees, its windows reflecting the morning sunlight. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, confirming someone was inside. Daniel parked his truck behind Adrian's car, stepping out cautiously. "This is it. Let's hope he's willing to talk." Adrian led Stella up the creaky porch steps, knocking firmly on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the door opened a crack, revealing a gaunt, disheveled man. His eyes darted between Adrian and Stella before widening in recognition. "Stella?" Jared's voice cracked, his hand gripping the doorframe for support. "Is that her?" "She's here," Adrian said firmly. "We need answers. What happened to her? Why did you leave her?" Jared's face contorted with guilt as he opened the door wider. "Come in, I'll explain." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, with a faint scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. Jared motioned for them to sit while he remained standing, pacing nervously. "I loved Stella," he began, his voice trembling. "When Eleanor passed, I thought I could handle taking care of her. But the grief, it was too much. Stella reminded me of everything I'd lost. I didn't abandon her on purpose. One day she got loose and I couldn't find her. I searched for weeks, but I failed." Adrian felt a surge of frustration. "Why didn't you report her missing? Why didn't you tell someone?" Jared looked down, shame etched across his face. "I didn't want to admit I'd failed, Eleanor. I thought if I couldn't find Stella, I didn't deserve to keep searching. I thought she'd find her way back, like she always did." Lydia spoke up, her voice steady but firm. "She didn't. She was injured and alone. If Adrian hadn't found her, she might not have survived." Jared sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I never stopped loving her." Stella, who had been lying quietly by Adrian's feet, suddenly stood and approached Jared. Her movements were tentative but purposeful. Jared's eyes filled with tears as Stella nudged his hand with her nose. "She remembers me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Even after everything, she remembers." Adrian felt a lump in his throat. "Dogs don't hold grudges, Jared. But they do deserve care and respect. If you're willing to take responsibility, there's a chance to make things right." As the group discussed a plan for Stella's care, Daniel stepped outside to retrieve supplies from his truck. The crisp forest air greeted him, but something felt off. His instincts, honed by years of experience as a park ranger, kicked in. He scanned the surroundings, his eyes narrowing at movement near the tree line. "Adrian," Daniel called, stepping back into the cabin. "We might have company." Adrian's brow furrowed as he stood. "What do you mean?" Daniel pointed toward the window. "I saw movement. Could be a coyote or something else. Either way, we should check it out." Jared stiffened. "Coyotes don't usually come this close to the cabin unless something's drawn them in." Adrian and Daniel exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Grabbing a flashlight and a sturdy walking stick, Adrian nodded. "Let's go." Outside, the forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the crunch of leaves underfoot. Daniel led the way, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. Adrian followed closely, his senses on high alert. They didn't have to search long. At the edge of the property, they found what had drawn the attention of wildlife. A torn bag of dog food scattered near the trees. Tracks surrounded the area, too large to be coyotes, but not quite human. Adrian crouched, examining the prints. "These don't look like wild animals." "Someone's been here." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Probably the same person who left the food to attract coyotes. Whoever it was, they wanted Stella vulnerable." Adrian stood, his grip tightening on the walking stick. "We need to get back to the cabin." Now, back inside, Jared and Lydia were tending to Stella when Adrian and Daniel burst through the door, their urgency palpable. "We've got a problem," Adrian said quickly, explaining what they'd found. "Someone's been here and they're not friendly." Jared's expression darkened. "This cabin was supposed to be a safe haven. If someone's targeting Stella, they might not stop with her." Lydia's voice wavered. "Why would anyone want to hurt Stella? She's just a dog." Adrian shook his head. "She's more than that. If someone thinks she's worth something, maybe as a rare breed or for her connection to Eleanor, they might see her as a prize." Jared stood, his determination solidifying. "We're not going to let anyone take her. This is my fault for leaving her unprotected, but I won't let it happen again." Adrian placed a reassuring hand on Jared's shoulder. "We'll protect her together. But we need to be smart about this." Back inside, Jared and Lydia were tending to Stella when Adrian and Daniel burst through the door, their urgency palpable. "We've got a problem," Adrian said quickly, explaining what they'd found. "Someone's been here and they're not friendly." Jared's expression darkened. "This cabin was supposed to be a safe haven. If someone's targeting Stella, they might not stop with her." Lydia's voice wavered. "Why would anyone want to hurt Stella? She's just a dog." Adrian shook his head. "She's more than that. If someone thinks she's worth something, maybe as a rare breed or for her connection to Eleanor, they might see her as a prize." Jared stood, his determination solidifying. "We're not going to let anyone take her." This is my fault for leaving her unprotected, but I won't let it happen again. Adrian placed a reassuring hand on Jared's shoulder. We'll protect her together, but we need to be smart about this. The tension in the cabin was almost suffocating as Jared and Adrian prepared to confront whoever or whatever was lurking outside. Daniel stood by the window, his sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit perimeter for movement. Lydia stayed close to Stella, whispering soothing words to keep her calm, though her own hands trembled with fear. Adrian motioned to Jared, holding a flashlight in one hand and gripping the walking stick in the other. We go slow, stick together, and don't make any sudden moves. Whoever's out there, they're counting on fear to control us. Jared nodded, swallowing hard. His gaze flicked toward Stella, who lifted her head slightly, as if sensing the unease. Let's do this, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. As they stepped onto the porch, the cool night air hit them, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of branches. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing little more than shadows and the outlines of the forest. Adrian's grip on the walking stick tightened. Stay alert, he murmured, his voice barely audible. The crunch of gravel underfoot drew their attention to the side of the cabin. Jared pointed toward the faint outline of a figure, crouched low near the scattered dog food. Adrian raised the flashlight, the beam landing on a man dressed in ragged clothes, his face partially obscured by a hood. Hey, Adrian called out, his voice firm. Who are you, and what are you doing here? The man froze, his hands hovering near the ground. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his movements deliberate. As the flashlight illuminated his face, it became clear he was no stranger to hard times. His face was gaunt, and his eyes held a mix of defiance and desperation. I don't want any trouble, the man said, his voice rough. I didn't mean to scare anyone. Jared stepped forward, his tone sharp. Then why were you sneaking around my property? What do you want? The man hesitated, glancing toward the cabin before his gaze landed on Jared. I heard about the dog, he admitted. The one that survived all this way. People talk, you know. A dog like that, people think she's worth something. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Worth something? You mean to sell her? The man shrugged, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. I don't know. I just wanted to see for myself. Some folks think she's valuable, but I wasn't going to hurt her, I swear. Jared's fists clenched at his sides. You think she's just a commodity. She's not something to be traded or sold. She's part of my family. The man raised his hands in a placating gesture. Look, I get it. I messed up coming here. But there are others. People who won't just walk away. The man's words hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder that their troubles might just be beginning. Adrian exchanged a glance with Jared, his mind racing. If word had spread about Stella, it wouldn't be long before more opportunists, or worse, showed up. Why did you come alone? Adrian pressed, his tone firm. Are you scouting for someone? The man shook his head vehemently. No, I swear I came on my own. But I overheard a group talking about heading this way, said something about claiming what's theirs. Jared's stomach churned. What do you mean, what's theirs? Stella doesn't belong to anyone but me. The man hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. I think they mean her because of her connection to Eleanor. They think she might have been trained for something valuable. Adrian's jaw tightened. Eleanor was a retired dog trainer, and Stella's an exceptional dog, but that doesn't give anyone the right to target her. The man took a step back, his movements hesitant. I'm telling you what I know. Take it or leave it. But if I were you, I'd be ready for trouble. Jared's voice hardened as he took a step closer to the man. You'd better hope you're telling the truth. If you're lying or leading those people here... Adrian placed a hand on Jared's shoulder, interrupting him. We're not going to waste time with threats. Let's focus on keeping Stella safe. The man nodded quickly, retreating into the darkness. I won't bother you again, he muttered, before disappearing into the trees. Back inside the cabin, the group regrouped, the man's warning weighing heavily on them. Daniel locked the doors and reinforced the windows, while Adrian and Lydia discussed their next steps. We can't stay here, Adrian said, his tone decisive. If what he said is true, this place isn't safe anymore. Jared's expression was grim. But where would we go? Stella's still recovering. and she needs stability. Lydia placed a hand on his arm. We'll figure it out. The most important thing is keeping her safe. Daniel returned from securing the cabin. If they're coming, we need to be ready. We'll stand our ground for now, but if things escalate, we need an exit strategy. Adrian nodded. Agreed. So let's focus on protecting Stella and making sure we're prepared for anything. The atmosphere inside the cabin grew heavier as the night wore on. Each creak of the wooden floor, each rustle of the wind outside, felt like a prelude to something far more ominous. Jared sat beside Stella, gently stroking her fur. Her big, expressive eyes looked up at him, silently conveying her trust, and it only deepened his resolve. Adrian stood by the window, scanning the tree line with binoculars borrowed from the cabin's storage. "No movement yet," he muttered, his voice low but tense. "But that doesn't mean we're in the clear." Lydia moved through the cabin, preparing a makeshift pack with essentials, first aid supplies, water, and a few cans of food. "If we need to make a quick getaway, we need to be ready," she said, glancing at Jared. "But we can't leave Stella behind, she's too vulnerable." Jared's jaw tightened. "I'd never leave her. Whatever happens, we stick together." As the group worked silently, a sharp bark from Stella broke the tense quiet. She stood up, her ears pricked, and her gaze fixed on the front door. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Jared immediately crouched beside her, his heart pounding. "What is it, girl?" he whispered. Though her reaction told him everything he needed to know, someone or something was approaching. Daniel moved quickly to extinguish the lamps, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Everyone stay quiet," he instructed. "If they're out there, we don't want to make it easy for them." Adrian motioned for Jared to stay with Stella, while he and Daniel positioned themselves near the windows. Through the moonlight filtering in, they caught sight of faint shadows moving just beyond the tree line. "They're here," Adrian confirmed, his voice barely audible. "Looks like at least 3 of them." Jared's hands clenched into fists. "What do they want with her?" "She's just a dog." Adrian turned to him, his expression serious. "Not to them. To them, she's a symbol of strength, loyalty, maybe even value. They don't care about her as a living being. That's why we can't let them get anywhere near her." The first knock came, loud and deliberate, shattering the fragile silence. "We know you're in there," a voice called out. It was deep and authoritative, with an edge that sent a chill down Jared's spine. "Let's make this easy. Hand over the dog, and we'll leave you alone." Adrian stepped toward the door, his movements careful. "What makes you think you have any right to demand that?" he shouted back, his tone steady. The man outside chuckled darkly. "We're not here to debate. You've got something we want. Either you hand it over, or things get ugly." Lydia whispered to Jared. "What do we do?" "We can't fight them. We're outnumbered." Jared shook his head. "We're not giving her up. Not now, not ever." The second knock was harder, almost a bang. "This is your last chance," the voice warned. "We don't have all night." Adrian turned to the group, his eyes meeting Jared's. "Get Stella out of here," he said firmly. "There's a back way through the woods. I'll distract them." "No way," Jared protested. "I'm not leaving you here to face them alone." Daniel stepped forward. "I'll stay too. We can hold them off long enough for you to get Stella to safety." Adrian nodded, though the tension in his expression betrayed his fear. "Fine, but you don't wait too long. Once they realize we're stalling, things could get bad fast." Jared scooped Stella into his arms, careful not to aggravate her injuries. "We'll find a safe place," he promised her, his voice steady despite the panic rising inside him. He turned to Lydia, who had already slung the pack over her shoulder. "Let's go." Lydia led the way to the back door, her steps quick but silent. As they slipped into the night, Adrian opened the front door just enough to show himself. "You want to talk?" "Let's talk," he called out, drawing the attention of the men outside. The woods were dark and disorienting, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon above. Jared followed close behind Lydia, his heart racing as he navigated the uneven terrain. Stella whimpered softly in his arms, sensing the danger. "Almost there," Lydia whispered, glancing back at him. "There's an old hunting cabin up ahead. We can hide there until it's safe." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the direction of the cabin they'd just left. Jared froze, his grip tightening on Stella. "What was that?" he asked, fear creeping into his voice. Lydia's face was pale. They've started breaking in. Adrian and Daniel are running out of time. Before Jared could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps behind them made his blood run cold. He turned, his eyes scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. Stella began to growl again, her body tensing in his arms. "Keep moving," Lydia urged. "We can't stop now." But the footsteps grew louder, closer. Jared felt his pulse quicken as he realized they were being followed. "Go," he whispered to Lydia. "Get to the cabin. I'll hold them off." "No way," Lydia shot back. "We stick together." They pushed forward, their pace quickening despite the weight of fear and exhaustion bearing down on them. When the hunting cabin finally came into view, relief flooded Jared's chest. But as they reached the door, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. "Well, well," the man drawled, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "Looks like you didn't get far." Jared froze, Stella still cradled in his arms as the man's shadow loomed over them. Lydia instinctively stepped in front of Jared, holding up her arms defensively. The man's face was partially obscured by the dark, but his malicious grin was unmistakable. "Well, you gave us a bit of a chase," the man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But I always catch what I'm after." Jared tightened his grip on Stella, who let out a low growl. "You're not taking her," he said, his voice firm despite the fear coursing through him. The man chuckled, taking a slow step forward. "Is that so? You've got guts, kid." "I'll give you that, but guts won't save you." Lydia glanced around, her mind racing for a solution. "You don't have to do this," she said, trying to reason with him. "She's just a dog. Why go to these lengths?" The man's grin faltered slightly, replaced by a glint of anger. "You think this is about a dog?" he snarled. "You have no idea what you're caught up in. That mutt's worth more than you can imagine." Jared stepped back, his heart pounding. "Worth more? What are you talking about?" The man's eyes narrowed, and he took another step closer. "Let's just say she's special, and someone's willing to pay a lot to get her back. Hand her over, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Before Jared could respond, Stella let out a sharp bark, startling the man. The sudden sound seemed to jolt Jared into action. He shifted Stella into Lydia's arms. "Run," he whispered urgently. "Get her out of here." "I'm not leaving you," Lydia protested. Jared shook his head, his gaze locked on the man. "I'll distract him. Just go." Before Jared could respond, Stella let out a sharp bark, startling the man. The sudden sound seemed to jolt Jared into action. He shifted Stella into Lydia's arms. "Run," he whispered urgently. "Get her out of here." "I'm not leaving you," Lydia protested. Jared shook his head, his gaze locked on the man. "I'll distract him, just go." The two clashed, Jared dodging the man's initial swing and landing a desperate punch to his side. The impact wasn't enough to do much damage, but it gave Jared a brief window to grab a nearby branch. He swung it with all his strength, catching the man across the shoulder and sending him stumbling back. "You've got some fight in you," the man growled, straightening up. "But you're out of your league." Jared didn't respond, his focus solely on keeping the man occupied. Each swing and block felt like an eternity, the adrenaline surging through his veins, the only thing keeping him going. The two clashed, Jared dodging the man's initial swing and landing a desperate punch to his side. The impact wasn't enough to do much damage, but it gave Jared a brief window to grab a nearby branch. He swung it with all his strength, catching the man across the shoulder and sending him stumbling back. "You've got some fight in you," the man growled, straightening up. "But you're out of your league." Jared didn't respond, his focus solely on keeping the man occupied. Each swing and block felt like an eternity, the adrenaline surging through his veins, the only thing keeping him going. Back in the woods, Jared was losing steam. The man's strength was overpowering, and each blow Jared took made it harder to stay on his feet. But he refused to give up. He thought of Stella, of her unwavering trust in him, and it gave him the will to keep fighting. As the man advanced for another strike, a sudden piercing howl echoed through the woods. Both men froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the sound. Out of the shadows emerged a pack of stray dogs, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. "What the?" the man muttered, stepping back. The pack surrounded them, their growls low and menacing. At the center of the group was a large, scarred dog with a commanding presence. It stepped forward, baring its teeth at the man. Jared stared in disbelief as the dog seemed to nod toward him, as if acknowledging his bravery. The man cursed under his breath, clearly outnumbered. "This isn't over!" he spat, backing away. "You'll regret this." He turned and fled into the night, the pack snapping at his heels until he disappeared from sight. Jared collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. The large dog approached him, its gaze softening. It nudged him gently, as if to say, "You did well. Thank you," Jared whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how, but thank you." The pack lingered for a moment before retreating into the woods, their job done. Jared took a deep breath and stumbled toward the cabin, his legs barely holding him up. When he reached the door, Lydia threw it open, relief flooding her face. "Jared," she cried, pulling him inside. "Are you okay? What happened?" He sank into a chair, his breaths heavy. "I'm fine, but you wouldn't believe what just happened." Lydia handed him a bottle of water, her concern etched across her face. "Tell me later. Right now. You need to rest." Stella hobbled over to Jared, her tail wagging weakly. He smiled and pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her fur. "We did it, girl," he murmured. "We're safe." As the first rays of dawn broke through the cabin windows, Jared, Lydia, and Stella sat together, the night's horrors giving way to a sense of calm. For the first time in hours, they allowed themselves to breathe, knowing they had overcome the impossible. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the cabin walls, casting warm rays over Jared, Lydia, and Stella. But even as the night gave way to day, an air of unease lingered. Jared sat by the window, his eyes scanning the tree line for any signs of the man who had haunted them through the night. Lydia placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You need rest," she said softly. "You've been up all night." Jared shook his head, his grip tightening on the chair. "I can't relax, not yet. He said this wasn't over. What if he comes back? What if he—" A low growl from Stella interrupted him. The dog's ears were pinned back, her body tense. She had limped to the door, her nose pressed against the crack at its base, sniffing intently. Jared and Lydia exchanged worried glances. Before either of them could react, the sound of footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Jared motioned for Lydia to stay behind him as he approached the door, his heart pounding. With a deep breath, he yanked it open, revealing the scarred dog from the night before. It stood there, calm and resolute, its gaze fixed on Jared. The dog stepped forward, nudging a bundle it had carried in its mouth onto the porch. Jared crouched down, inspecting it carefully. Inside was a tattered jacket, one he immediately recognized as belonging to the man who had attacked them. The dog growled softly, looking toward the forest as if urging Jared to follow. "What is it doing?" Lydia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jared stood, his jaw set. "It's showing us where he went." Armed with nothing but determination, Jared and Lydia followed the scarred dog into the woods, Stella hobbling along beside them. The forest was eerily quiet, the morning sun doing little to dispel the tension. The dog led them with purpose, weaving through trees and underbrush until they reached a small clearing. There, in the center, was the man's campsite, or what was left of it. The remains of a smoldering fire and scattered belongings suggested a hasty departure. Jared approached cautiously, scanning the area for clues. His eyes fell on a crumpled map near the fire pit, marked with several points and scribbled notes. "He's planning something," Jared muttered, picking up the map. This wasn't just about Stella. He's after something bigger. Lydia pointed to a nearby set of tire tracks leading away from the site. "He must have taken off in a vehicle. Do you think we can catch him?" Jared hesitated, his mind racing. "Maybe, but we need help. We can't do this alone." The scarred dog barked as if agreeing, and turned to lead them back toward the cabin. Jared pocketed the map and followed, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about protecting Stella anymore. It was about stopping a man who clearly had no regard for the lives he endangered. When they returned to the cabin, Jared grabbed his phone and dialed the local police. His hands trembled as he relayed the events of the past 24 hours, from the man's initial attack to the discovery of his campsite. The officer on the other end listened intently, her tone serious. "We'll send a team to investigate immediately," she assured him. "Stay where you are and keep that dog close. It sounds like she's the key to all of this." Jared hung up, turning to Lydia and Stella. "They're on their way. We just have to hold tight." The hours dragged by, each minute feeling like an eternity. Jared paced the cabin, his nerves frayed. Lydia tried to keep Stella comfortable, tending to her injuries as best as she could. The scarred dog lay by the door, its eyes never straying from the tree line. Finally, the distant sound of sirens broke the silence. Jared stepped outside, relief washing over him as police vehicles pulled up the gravel road. A tall, stern officer emerged, flanked by a team of deputies. "Mr. Grant?" the officer asked, extending a hand. Jared nodded. "That's me. Thank you for coming." As the officers fanned out to secure the area, Jared handed the map to the lead officer, explaining its significance. The officer's expression darkened as he studied it. "These markings, they align with reports we've received about illegal animal trafficking in the region. This guy is part of something much bigger." Jared's stomach turned. "Animal trafficking? Is that why he wanted Stella?" The officer nodded grimly. "Likely. Dogs like her are rare and valuable in certain circles. He probably planned to sell her to the highest bidder." Lydia stepped forward, her voice shaking. "But why go to such extremes? Why not just find another dog?" The officer sighed. "It's not just about the dog. It's about breaking the spirit of those who try to protect them. People like him thrive on fear and control." Jared clenched his fists, anger boiling within him. "Then let's stop him." The officer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We will. With the evidence you've provided, we have a strong case. And with Stella's help, we might just be able to take down his entire operation." As the police prepared to track the man using the map and tire tracks, Jared knelt beside Stella. "You've been through so much, girl," he whispered, stroking her fur. "But we're going to make sure no one ever hurts you again." Stella licked his hand, her eyes shining with trust and gratitude. The scarred dog barked once, as if in agreement, before trotting off to join the officers. Jared watched it go, a newfound respect for the mysterious canine filling his heart. By the time the police convoy disappeared into the forest, the sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the cabin. Jared and Lydia sat on the porch with Stella between them, the weight of the ordeal finally beginning to lift. "She's safe now," Lydia said, her voice soft. "And so are we." Jared nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Thanks to her, and thanks to that dog." He looked down at Stella, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. "You're more than just a dog, Stella. You're a survivor." The sun dipped lower in the sky as Jared, Lydia, and Stella sat quietly on the porch of the cabin. The tranquility of the forest was a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured over the past 48 hours. Stella rested her head on Jared's lap, her soft breaths a comforting rhythm that eased the tension still lingering in the air. Jared looked down at her, his hand gently stroking her fur. "You've been through so much, girl," he said softly, "but you're safe now. We'll make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Lydia leaned against the railing, her eyes reflecting the warm hues of the setting sun. "It's incredible how brave she's been," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "And that other dog. I can't believe how it helped us." Jared nodded. "It's like it knew exactly what needed to be done, almost as if it was sent to us." Later that evening, the lead officer returned to the cabin to give an update. His uniform was streaked with dirt, and his face bore the marks of a long and arduous day. "We've found him," he said, his tone steady but weary. "He's in custody now." Jared let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "What happens now?" the officer explained. "With the evidence we gathered from the campsite and the map you handed over, we have enough to not only prosecute him, but also dismantle a network of illegal animal traffickers. It's a significant breakthrough." Lydia's eyes widened. "So Stella was a target because of them?" The officer nodded. "She was, but thanks to her and to you, we've taken the first step towards stopping them for good." As the officer prepared to leave, Jared hesitated. "What about the other dog? The one that led us to the campsite?" The officer smiled faintly. It disappeared shortly after we secured the area. It's almost like it knew its job was done. Jared exchanged a look with Lydia. They both understood that the scarred dog's presence had been nothing short of miraculous. Whether it was fate or something beyond explanation, they were grateful for its intervention. In the days that followed, Jared and Lydia focused on helping Stella recover. Her wounds healed slowly, but her spirit remained unbroken. She seemed to sense that she was finally safe, and her playful side began to emerge. Jared would often find her wagging her tail at the slightest hint of attention, a sign that she was beginning to trust again. Lydia suggested reaching out to a local vet for a thorough checkup. Dr. Harper, a kind and experienced veterinarian, immediately took a liking to Stella. "She's a fighter," he said, after examining her. "But she'll need some time to fully heal, physically and emotionally." Jared nodded. "She's got all the time she needs. She's part of our family now." News of Stella's story spread through the small community, inspiring many. Local shelters and animal rescue organizations reached out, wanting to share her journey to raise awareness about animal welfare. Jared and Lydia agreed, hoping that Stella's resilience could encourage others to take action against cruelty and neglect. One afternoon, while Jared was chopping wood near the cabin, a car pulled up the driveway. It was the officer who had taken their statement days earlier. He stepped out, holding a small plaque. "What's this?" Jared asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. The officer smiled. "It's a token of appreciation from the department and the community. What you and Stella did helped save more lives than you'll ever know." Jared accepted the plaque, his heart swelling with pride. It read, "In recognition of courage and compassion for standing against injustice." As the weeks turned into months, the cabin became a sanctuary not just for Jared and Lydia, but for Stella as well. Her playful barks echoed through the forest, a sound that brought a smile to their faces every time. Jared often found himself reflecting on the events that had brought them together. "Funny how life works," he mused one evening, sitting on the porch with Lydia and Stella by his side. "If someone had told me a year ago that a dog would change everything, I wouldn't have believed them." Lydia laughed softly. "She's more than just a dog, Jared. She's a symbol of hope, of second chances." One day, while exploring the forest, Jared and Lydia stumbled upon a small, weathered marker near the clearing where they had first encountered the scarred dog. Inscribed on it were the words, "In memory of Scout, a loyal protector." Jared knelt down, tracing the letters with his fingers. "Scout," he murmured. "That must have been its name." Lydia placed a hand on his shoulder. "It makes sense now. Scout wasn't just any dog. It was watching over us, just like it always had." They stood in silence for a moment, paying their respects to the dog that had played such a pivotal role in their story. Jared glanced down at Stella, her tail wagging as if in acknowledgement. "Let's head back," he said, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. As they walked back to the cabin, Jared couldn't help but feel a profound sense of peace. Stella trotted ahead, her golden fur glowing in the sunlight. She was no longer just a dog. They were no longer just her rescuers. Together, they were a family bound by resilience, courage, and an unshakable bond. Stories like Stella's remind us of the power of hope and the impact of compassion. If this journey inspired you, consider helping an animal in need or supporting your local shelters. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Let's keep spreading kindness, one story at a time.